Elliot Forsyth couldn't stand Wednesdays. It was a day stuck in the middle of the week, not Tuesday, when you could blame your fatigue on Monday, and not Thursday, when you could see the light of the weekend at the end of the tunnel. It was just another day at Norwood Mechanics, where he had been working as an industrial equipment design engineer for 7 years. That evening, as his beat-up Volkswagen turned onto Maple Street, the first raindrops began to drum on the windshield. Elliot sighed as he fumbled for the windshield wiper switch. The forecast promised a clear evening, yet another disappointment in a day that had begun with a leak in the coffee machine and ended with the main server crashing, forcing him to stay at work 2 hours late. The two-story house at number 42 looked exactly like the other houses on the street. Beige siding, a small porch, a neat lawn with a single maple tree in the middle. It was a typical middle-class home in a typical neighborhood in Norwood, a small town an hour's drive from Columbus, Ohio. 8 years ago, when he and Veronica had just bought the house, Elliot was sure it was a temporary arrangement, a stepping stone to something bigger. But every year, his assurances that next year we'll definitely start saving for a better house sounded less and less convincing. Elliot parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and closed his eyes for a moment. He was feeling tired. Lately, Veronica had often said that his job was sucking the life out of him, and she was right. But what could he do? Someone had to pay the bills, especially after she had left her stable job as an accountant at an insurance company to become assistant marketing director at a new real estate firm. The salary was lower, but Veronica was beaming with excitement as she talked about the prospects for growth and her new boss, Bradley Markham, who saw potential in her. The rain intensified. Elliot grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat and rushed to the front door. The house was unusually quiet and dark. Usually, by this time, Veronica would have returned from work and turned on at least the kitchen light. "There?" he called, turning on the light in the hallway and shaking the rain from his hair. "Are you home?" Silence. Elliot dropped his keys into a small wooden bowl on the table by the door, a ritual that had remained unchanged throughout their 8 years of marriage. Strange. Veronica usually let him know if she was going to be late from work. He went into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. A week's worth of takeout leftovers, a couple of apples, a half-empty bottle of white wine, a bachelor's diet. Lately, they had been cooking less and less at home. Veronica was too busy with her new job, and he had never been particularly talented in the kitchen. Taking an apple, Elliot leaned against the kitchen counter and thought about what to order for dinner. Wednesdays used to be their traditional pizza night, a tradition that started when they first started dating in college. But in recent months, that tradition had somehow faded away, like so many other little rituals that had once seemed so important. Giovanni's pizza place, or maybe Thai food from the new restaurant that opened a couple of months ago. Elliot took his phone out of his pocket when it suddenly vibrated. Veronica's name lit up on the screen. "Hey, where are you?" he asked, answering the call. "Elliot?" Veronica's voice sounded strangely excited. "Are you home yet? I thought you'd be late today." "The server was fixed faster than expected," he replied, frowning. "Where are you?" She faltered for a split second. "I'll be there soon. I have a surprise for you." Something in her tone made Elliot tense up. In 8 years of marriage, he had learned to pick up on the nuances in his wife's voice. This wasn't pure enthusiasm, but a nervous, almost hysterical excitement. "What kind of surprise?" He tried to keep his tone casual. "You'll see when I get there," she replied quickly. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I love you." And she hung up without waiting for his reply. Elliot slowly lowered the phone and stared at the dark screen in confusion. Veronica had been acting strangely lately, coming home late, distracted, constantly checking her phone. But he had chalked it up to stress from her new job. After all, they had their ups and downs like any marriage, but overall everything seemed normal. Or was he just not noticing the obvious signs? Elliot went upstairs to change. Their bedroom was slightly messy, which was unusual for Veronica, who had always been a neat freak. Several outfits lay on her side of the bed, clearly tried on and rejected that morning. There was more makeup on the dressing table than she usually took with her to work. He opened the closet to get his sweatpants and noticed empty hangers where several of her best dresses usually hung. Strange. Veronica had started dressing more elegantly for work lately, but why would she take her evening gowns out of the house? After changing, Elliot went back down to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of whiskey. He wasn't much of a drinker, but today he felt a vague uneasiness that he couldn't quite put his finger on. The feeling had been building for several weeks. Small changes in Veronica's behavior, her new wardrobe, her aloofness, the extra hours at work. He took a sip and thought about the last few months. When exactly had the changes begun? Probably when Veronica started working at Markham Properties. During the first few weeks, she came home excited, talking about the office, her clients, and her boss, a real professional with connections, as she put it. Bradley Markham, the 42-year-old owner and managing agent of the agency, a former college football player who had moved into real estate. "He sees great potential in me," Veronica kept saying. At the time, Elliot was happy for her. After so many years of monotonous work at an insurance company, she had finally found something that really excited her. But then the late nights at work began, along with business dinners and weekends spent preparing presentations. At first, it happened once a week, then twice. Then it became almost the norm. "Bradley thinks I can be marketing director by the end of the year if I keep up the good work," she explained when she missed Elliot's mother's birthday last month because of an urgent project. And then 2 weeks ago, there was this strange situation when he stopped by her office to take her out to dinner for their anniversary and saw her leaving the building with a tall man in an expensive suit. They were standing too close together for a business conversation, and Veronica was laughing the way she hadn't laughed in his presence in a long time. When she saw his car, she quickly said goodbye to her companion and walked over to Elliot as if nothing had happened. "That was Bradley," she said casually. "We were discussing a new strategy for a client." Elliot pushed the thoughts away. Veronica had never given him any reason to be jealous or distrustful. Their marriage had been strong so far, and they had always been honest with each other. And yet, the sound of a car pulling up snapped him out of his reverie. Elliot put down his almost untouched whiskey and went to the window. A shiny black Audi, not Veronica's car, pulled up behind his Volkswagen on the driveway. She drove a modest Honda Civic that was already 6 years old. The Audi door opened and Veronica got out. Even through the rain-streaked glass, Elliot could see that she was dressed differently than when she had left for work that morning. Instead of her usual office attire, she was wearing a dark, form-fitting dress that he had never seen before. She stood under the porch canopy but did not enter the house. Instead, she turned toward the car and appeared to be talking to someone. Elliot couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows. Suddenly, all the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in his mind, forming a picture he instinctively didn't want to see. A new job, a new wardrobe, late nights, a mysterious boss who sees potential in her. When the front door opened, Elliot was already standing in the hallway, his arms crossed over his chest. Veronica came in, shaking her rain-soaked hair. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and her expensive dress looked a little wrinkled. Seeing the look on her husband's face, she froze in the doorway. "Elliot," she said with feigned joy, "you're home already. I have a surprise for you." "Yes, you mentioned it on the phone," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "And judging by the look of it, that surprise brought you home in an Audi?" Veronica quickly closed the door behind her, as if trying to shut out the car still parked in the driveway. "I can explain," she said. and there was a note in her voice that Elliot had never heard before, a mixture of nervousness and some strange excitement. "I'm listening," he said, feeling his heart pound in his throat. It's it's about us." Veronica took a step forward, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. "I talked to Bradley about our relationship, and he has an idea that could give us a new start." Elliot felt a chill run down his spine. "Bradley? Your boss? What does he have to do with this?" he asked, already knowing the answer but desperately hoping he was wrong. "He's out there in the car," Veronica replied, nodding toward the door. "He wants to talk to both of us. He has a proposal, something that could change our lives for the better." Elliot stared silently at his wife, trying to recognize the nervous, agitated woman with disheveled hair and shining eyes as the Veronica he had known all these years. The level-headed, intelligent girl who had once told him on their third date that she valued honesty and respect above all else in a relationship. "What's going on, Veronica?" he asked quietly, his voice sounding more tired than angry. She took a deep breath as if preparing to dive into cold water. "Bradley thinks our relationship could become more interesting," she began, choosing her words carefully. "He says you may not realize it, but many modern couples experiment to keep the passion alive. He wants to join us." In the silence that followed, Elliot could hear only the sound of rain outside the window and the pounding of his heart. He looked at Veronica as if he were seeing her for the first time in his life. The Audi was still parked in the driveway with the engine running, and now Elliot knew who was behind the wheel. The man who had ruined his life without even getting out of his car. Elliot felt the room begin to spin around him. Veronica continued to speak, but her words reached him as if through a thick veil of water. "It's called cuckolding," she said with the nervous excitement of someone trying to convince not so much her conversation partner as herself. "Bradley explained to me that it's a perfectly normal practice. Lots of couples do it." Elliot looked at his wife, not recognizing her. 8 years of marriage, 12 years of dating, and now she was standing in front of him with smeared lipstick and tousled hair, telling him how her boss wanted to sleep with her in their marital bed. "Did you sleep with him?" Elliot finally said, surprised at the calmness of his voice. Veronica lowered her eyes. "I didn't mean to, I swear. It just happened. First there were the company parties, then the business dinners. He's so attentive, so charismatic. And he kept talking about you and me, about our marriage." She faltered, searching for the right words. "He says that a relationship like ours needs a catalyst. That it could be good for everyone." Elliot took a deep breath, trying to make sense of what was happening. "How long has this been going on?" 2 weeks, Veronica replied quickly, as if the length of time mattered. "But today he asked to talk to you. He said he wanted everything to be honest and open, that this could be a new chapter for us." "A new chapter?" Elliot felt something break inside him. "You brought your lover to our house and expect me to participate in your game?" "It's not like that, Elliot." Veronica took a step toward him, but he backed away. "Bradley says that many men, that it's normal, that it can even strengthen our relationship." "Stop repeating what Bradley says." Elliot raised his voice for the first time. "I want to know what you think." Veronica bit her lip. "I think our marriage has become mundane, predictable. I think we both deserve something more exciting." She looked up at him. "Bradley says you're a beta male and that's okay. That there are men who are made for careers and achievements, and there are those who find pleasure in other forms of relationships." Elliot froze, struck not so much by the words as by how easily his wife had said them. It was as if she were reading from a script she had memorized. These terms, this logic, it was all so foreign to the Veronica he knew. "What do you really think of me?" he asked quietly. without the Bradley words. Veronica looked confused, as if the question had caught her off guard. "I love you, Elliot. I always have. But," she faltered, "but sometimes love needs catalysts, new experiences, to push the boundaries." There was something unnatural about the way she said those words, as if she were reading them from a hidden prompter. Elliot suddenly realized with painful clarity that the person standing in front of him was no longer the Veronica he had known. Something had changed in her over the past few weeks, something fundamental. Dozens of moments from their life together flashed through his mind. Their first meeting in the college cafeteria, their awkward first date, their first kiss on the bridge over the river, their modest wedding, the purchase of this house. All the little bricks that had built their life were now crumbling before his eyes. "I want to talk to him," Elliot said suddenly. Veronica beamed. "Really? I knew you'd understand." She reached for the phone. "I'll tell him to come up right now." "No," Elliot stopped her sharply. "I'll go out to him myself." Veronica nodded uncertainly. "Okay. Just, Elliot, promise you'll be open to talking? Bradley is very persuasive when he explains his ideas. He's read a lot about it and—" Elliot wasn't listening anymore. He headed for the door, feeling a strange numbness fill him with every step. It was as if it wasn't happening to him, but to a character in a movie he was watching from the sidelines. The rain was still drizzling when Elliot stepped onto the porch. A black Audi gleamed in the streetlights. Elliot slowly approached the car, noticing that the driver had rolled down the window. Behind the wheel sat a man in his early 40s, tall, athletic, with a confident smile on his face. Elliot recognized him. It was the same man he had seen with Veronica outside the office 2 weeks ago. "You must be Elliot," said Bradley Markham with a smile that had probably helped him sell hundreds of houses to naive buyers. "Nice to meet you at last. Veronica has told me so much about you." Elliot stared silently at the man who had ruined his life. The man looked completely carefree, as if he had come for a friendly visit, not to destroy someone else's marriage. "Did she explain the situation to you?" Bradley continued when the silence lingered. "Yes," Elliot replied curtly. "And what do you think?" Bradley asked with such casualness, as if they were discussing where to go for dinner. Elliot felt something dark and terrible growing inside him. Anger, pain, humiliation, all mixed together in a knot that grew larger with every passing second. "I think you'd better leave," he said finally. Bradley tilted his head as if he hadn't heard. "Listen, I understand that this may sound strange at first, but many couples find such arrangements very refreshing, especially after so many years of marriage." "I said you'd better leave," Elliot repeated a little louder. Bradley smiled with the look of a man accustomed to resistance and knowing how to overcome it. "Listen, buddy, I just want to be honest. Something has already happened between Veronica and me. She must have told you about it, but there's no hostility on my part. On the contrary, I'm offering a way that could enrich your relationship." Elliot took a step closer to the car. "You slept with my wife, came to my house to humiliate me, and you're talking about no hostility." "Humiliate?" Bradley shook his head with an expression of sincere incomprehension. "Not at all. I'm offering you a role that could bring you pleasure. Many men find—" "Shut up," Elliot said quietly. "Just shut up and leave. Now." A slight shadow of irritation appeared in Bradley's eyes. "Listen, Elliot, I think you need to calm down and think about this. Veronica has already made her choice. The question is how you're going to live with it." Elliot remembered that moment in minute detail, the raindrops running down Bradley's face, his smug smile, the scent of expensive cologne wafting from the Audi. The whole world seemed to freeze for a split second and then explode. Elliot grabbed the door handle and yanked it hard. The door flew open, and he practically pulled Bradley out of the car. The man was taller and bigger, but Elliot's surprise gave him the advantage. "What are you doing?" Bradley shouted as Elliot pinned him against the side of the car. "What about you?" Elliot breathed in his face. "What are you doing?" Somewhere in the background he could hear Veronica running out onto the porch and shouting something, but it all sounded as if it were coming through a thick veil of water. All he could see was that smug face, those eyes looking at him with a mixture of surprise and contempt. "Let me go, or I'll call the police," Bradley hissed, trying to push Elliot away. But Elliot was stronger than he looked. All the years of working in the workshop, all the hours spent repairing the house, had given him a strength that his neat engineer's appearance successfully concealed. "I'll ask you one time," Elliot said, holding Bradley back. "How long has this been going on? And don't you dare lie to me." "What does it matter?" Bradley snapped. 2 weeks, a month. What matters is that she chose me, that she was moaning under me in a motel while you thought she was at a business meeting." Something snapped inside Elliot. A second ago, he had been prepared to limit himself to threats, to make this man leave and never return. But those words, that picture Bradley had painted so vividly, Elliot felt the last remnants of his self-control crumble to dust. "Elliot, no!" Veronica shouted, rushing toward them in the rain. But it was too late. Elliot's fist slammed into Bradley's jaw with such force that the man flew backward, hitting his head on the roof of the car. Bradley hadn't expected such a reaction. He was clearly used to people like Elliot, quiet, intelligent men with glasses who were incapable of physical confrontation. "You're crazy!" Bradley shouted, covering his broken lip with his hand. "Veronica, get your things and let's get out of here." But Elliot had no intention of stopping. Years of suppressed rage, months of vague suspicions, weeks of uncertainty, it all came pouring out in that moment. He hit Bradley again, this time in the stomach, causing him to double over. "Elliot, stop!" Veronica tried to pull him away, but he didn't seem to hear her. His eyes were red with rage. He didn't see Bradley Markham, but the embodiment of everything that was wrong with his life. All the injustices, all the compromises, all the times he had given in, backed down, agreed. Bradley tried to fight back, but his punch was weak and inaccurate. Elliot easily dodged it and pushed the man onto the hood of the car with such force that a dent appeared in the flawless black metal. "My car!" Bradley yelled, but his voice was cut off when Elliot grabbed him by the throat. "Listen to me carefully," Elliot hissed in his face. "If I see you near my house or my wife again, I won't stop at a broken face. Do you understand me?" Bradley nodded, staring in horror into Elliot's eyes. He finally understood that he was not facing a spineless beta male, as he had contemptuously called him, but a man who had been pushed to the limit and was ready to do anything. Elliot let him go, and Bradley staggered back to the driver's door. "You'll regret this," he muttered, wiping the blood from his broken lip. "I'll sue you for assault." "Go ahead," Elliot replied coldly, "and I'll tell everyone how the director of Markham Properties seduces his female employees and offers them to their husbands for his sexual fantasies. I'm sure your clients will be thrilled." Bradley turned pale. He took one last look at Veronica, standing in the rain with a look of utter shock on her face, then got into his car and started the engine. "Veronica, are you coming?" he asked through the rolled-down window. She didn't move, frozen between the two men, as if unsure what to do. "Veronica," Bradley repeated, a note of desperation in his voice. "Do you remember what we talked about? Do you remember what I promised you?" Elliot turned to his wife. "Decide," he said quietly. "Now." Veronica looked from one to the other, her eyes filled with tears. Finally, she took a step toward the house. "I'm sorry, Bradley," she whispered. "I can't." "You'll regret this," Bradley said, taking one last look at her before rolling up the window. The Audi pulled away and quickly disappeared into the darkness of the street. Elliot and Veronica stood there in the rain. He looked at her, not recognizing the woman he had lived with for 8 years. She seemed so small and lost now, with her makeup smeared and her hair wet and clinging to her face. "Elliot," she finally said in a trembling voice, "I don't know what came over me. He's very persuasive. He said things that made me feel special, wanted." Elliot raised his hand to stop her. "Don't," he said wearily. "Just don't." He turned and walked toward the house, feeling the adrenaline drain from his body, leaving only a dull ache and exhaustion. Everything he had believed in, everything he had held on to all these years was crumbling before his eyes, and he wasn't sure he would ever be able to pick up the pieces again. Veronica followed him, her steps uncertain on the wet asphalt of the driveway. "What now?" she asked quietly, stopping at the doorway. Elliot turned, looking at her with empty eyes. "Now?" he repeated with a bitter smile. "Now I'm going to drink, and then decide what to do with his life, what was left of it." The morning after rain always has a special smell, fresh, new, clean. But for Elliot, that smell was now mixed with the bitter taste of reality. He woke up on the couch in the living room, not immediately remembering why he hadn't slept in his bed. Then all the events of the previous evening came crashing down on him. Veronica had spent the night in the bedroom upstairs. After Bradley left, they had hardly spoken. Elliot simply couldn't find the strength to do so. He grabbed a blanket and a pillow and went downstairs, leaving his wife alone with her thoughts and tears. His head was splitting. Elliot struggled to get up from the sofa and shuffled into the kitchen. The clock on the microwave read 6:30 a.m., his usual time for getting up for work. But today, the thought of going to the factory seemed absurd. How could he sit at a computer, checking drawings and talking to colleagues when his whole life was in ruins? Elliot poured himself a glass of water and slowly drank it. Then another. His gaze fell on the bottle of whiskey he hadn't put away yesterday. No, drinking in the morning was too much as he wanted to forget. He picked up his phone and wrote a short message to his boss. "I'm sick. I won't be able to come in today. Sorry for the inconvenience." For the first time in 3 years of working at this place, he was taking sick leave without actually being physically ill. But right now, he needed time to figure out what to do next. Elliot sat down at the kitchen table and stared out the window. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting its first rays on the rain-soaked lawn. Life seemed so normal outside. The neighbor's cat was cautiously making its way through the grass. An elderly woman from the house across the street was taking out the trash. A school bus was passing by. A typical morning in Norwood. As if the world hadn't collapsed a few hours ago. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made him flinch. Veronica came down to the kitchen, pale and with red eyes from crying. She was wearing the same outfit as yesterday, the expensive dress, now wrinkled and ridiculous in the morning light. "Good morning," she said quietly. Elliot didn't answer. What was good about this morning? "I can explain everything," Veronica began after a pause. "What exactly?" Elliot asked, not looking at her. "How did you cheat on me with that smug jerk? Or how did you plan to humiliate me even more by bringing him into our home?" "I got confused," her voice trembled. "Bradley. He knows how to influence people. He makes them believe what he says. I don't know what came over me." "You're a grown woman, Veronica," Elliot replied, still staring out the window. "Not a child who can be seduced with candy. You made a conscious choice every time you went to bed with him." "I made a mistake," she whispered. "A terrible mistake." Elliot finally turned to her. "You know what the worst part is?" he asked wearily. "It's not the betrayal itself. It's how you thought of me, that you really believed I would agree to such humiliation." "I wasn't thinking clearly." Veronica sat down opposite him, her hands nervously fingering the hem of her dress. "Bradley said things about how modern relationships should be free, that monogamy is an outdated concept. And you thought that made sense? Elliot shook his head. After 8 years of marriage, you suddenly decided we needed free love. Veronica lowered her eyes. You don't understand how it was. He gradually changed my thinking. First compliments, then talk about my potential, then hints that you were holding me back. It happened so slowly that I didn't even notice how I ended up in this situation. Elliot sighed. He wanted to be angry, to shout, to accuse, but all he felt was emptiness. The woman in front of him, his wife, his partner, his friend, had become a stranger. I'm going to get ready for work, he said, getting up. You're going to work? Today? Veronica asked in surprise. No, Elliot replied. But I need to get out. I can't be here right now. He went upstairs, took a shower, and got dressed. Mechanical actions that required no thought. He gathered a few things in his backpack. He didn't know if he would be coming home today. Maybe it would be better to spend the night in a motel or at a friend's place. When Elliot went back down to the kitchen, Veronica was gone. He heard the sound of water in the bathroom downstairs. She was also getting ready for the new day, as if she could wash away yesterday along with her makeup and the smell of someone else's cologne. Elliot left the house without saying goodbye and got into his car. He started the engine but didn't move. Where to go? He couldn't go back to work. After yesterday, his brain refused to function normally. Home to his parents. No, they lived in Cincinnati, 3 hours away, and he didn't have the strength to explain the situation to them. To a friend? He took his phone and dialed a number. Nate? It's me, Elliot. Sorry to call so early. Are you free? I need to talk to someone. 20 minutes later, Elliot was sitting in a small coffee shop called Morning Espresso on the outskirts of Norwood. Nate Parker, his best friend since college, sat across from him, listening intently to his account of the previous day's events. They had known each other for almost 15 years, and if anyone could understand Elliot at a time like this, it was Nate. Damn, buddy, Nate said when Elliot finished speaking. That's just crazy. Yeah, Elliot smiled weakly. That's pretty much how I feel. What are you going to do? I don't know, Elliot replied honestly. Part of me just wants to pack up my things and leave, start over somewhere else. The other part, he faltered. The other part thinks about the fact that we've been together for 12 years. Can we just throw all that away? Nate frowned. Look, I understand that you and Veronica have been through a lot together, but what she did, it's not just a fling on the side. She brought that jerk to your house and offered you. He shook his head. That's a whole other level of betrayal, you know? Elliot nodded. He understood. Too well. I'm just trying to figure out how we got here, he said quietly. When did it all start falling apart? What did I miss? Nate took a sip of coffee and thought for a moment. Maybe it's not you, he said finally. People change. They turn out not to be who we thought they were, or they meet people who change them. But why? Elliot gripped the cup so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Why, after all these years, we were happy? At least I thought we were. Sometimes people don't realize what they have until they lose it, Nate said philosophically. Maybe Veronica is one of those people. She got bored, wanted something new, and gave in to temptation. Or maybe she never really loved me, Elliot said bitterly. Maybe I was just a convenient option, stable, safe. Hey, don't say that, Nate leaned forward. I've seen you two together all these years. What you had was real. But people are weak, Elliot. They do stupid things. They make mistakes. But a mistake like that, Elliot shook his head. I don't know if I can forgive that. Nate tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. You don't have to forgive her if you don't want to, he said finally. Forgiveness isn't an obligation. It's a choice. Elliot looked out the window. Day had fully broken, and the streets of Norwood were filling with people rushing about their business. Life went on. I don't know if I can ever trust her again, he said quietly. Every time she stays late at work, every time she checks her phone, I'll always think, is this happening again? Then maybe you need to ask yourself if you want to live like that, Nate said, looking seriously at his friend. A relationship without trust isn't a relationship. It's a prison for both of you. Elliot nodded. His friend was right. And somewhere deep down, he already knew the answer to that question. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud. I should probably talk to her, he said after a pause. Decide what to do about the house, the stuff. What about that guy, Bradley? He won't cause any trouble after your, conversation with him? Elliot remembered yesterday's scene and felt a strange mixture of shame and satisfaction. I don't think so, he replied. He has nothing on me that wouldn't make him look bad. Besides, Elliot smiled grimly, guys like him don't like to look weak. Admitting that he got beaten up by a nerd with glasses isn't going to earn him any points in his alpha club. Nate grinned. Too bad I didn't see his face. I bet he didn't expect you to be able to stand up for yourself. I didn't expect it myself, Elliot admitted. It was like something inside me just exploded. Sometimes we need a reminder that we're stronger than we think, Nate said, raising his cup in an informal toast. Here's to small victories. Elliot smiled faintly and raised his cup in response. For the first time in the last 24 hours, he felt something other than bitterness and disappointment. After coffee with Nate, Elliot decided to take a walk. It was a clear, sunny day, the kind of weather that usually lifted his spirits. But today, even the warm rays couldn't penetrate the veil of sadness that enveloped him. He walked along the familiar streets of Norwood, past the park where he and Veronica sometimes had picnics in the early years of their marriage, past the movie theater where they watched films on dates, past the little restaurant where he proposed to her. The whole city was filled with memories that now caused him pain. What would he do if they really broke up? Would he be able to live in this city, where every corner reminded him of her? Or would it be better to start over somewhere else? But that would mean leaving his job, his friends, familiar places. Elliot didn't notice how his feet had led him to the Markham Properties office, a modern two-story building with large glass windows. He stopped on the opposite side of the street, staring at the place where Veronica worked, where the destruction of their marriage had begun. Through the large windows on the first floor, Elliot could see the reception area and part of the office space. People were bustling about, busy with their work. He looked for Veronica but couldn't find her. Maybe she hadn't come to work yet. Or maybe she was in another part of the building. What if she was with him right now? With Bradley? What if, after yesterday's incident, she had chosen him after all? Elliot felt nausea rising in his throat. He turned away from the building and walked quickly away. He didn't need to see this. He didn't need to torture himself anymore. He didn't return home until evening, spending the day wandering aimlessly and thinking. During that time, he made the decision that had been maturing in him since morning, perhaps the only decision that made sense. The house was quiet when he entered. Veronica was sitting on the couch in the living room staring at the dark TV screen. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. "You're back," she said, with a barely perceptible relief in her voice. "We need to talk," Elliot replied, sitting down in the armchair opposite her. Not next to her, as before. Opposite her, like a stranger. Veronica straightened up as if preparing for a blow. "I understand you're angry," she began. "And you have every right to be. I made a terrible mistake." "It wasn't a mistake, Veronica," Elliot replied quietly. "A mistake is when you accidentally turn the wrong way or forget to buy milk. What you did was a choice. A series of choices." She lowered her head. "I know, and I don't know how to fix it." "Do you have to?" Elliot asked, surprised at how calm his voice sounded. "Fix it, I mean." Veronica looked up at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I think we need to break up," Elliot said, feeling a strange sense of relief at finally saying it out loud. "I don't see how we can continue after this." But, but we can try," she said, her voice filled with desperation. "Go to a family therapist, work on our relationship." "It's not about the relationship, Veronica," Elliot shook his head. "It's about trust, respect, everything that was destroyed last night. I can't trust you anymore. And to be honest, I'm not sure I ever will again." "Elliot, please." Tears streamed down her cheeks. 12 years. Are we just going to throw all that away? "You did that," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "When you decided that our marriage was less important than whatever Bradley was offering you." "I was a fool," she whispered. "I got confused." "Maybe," Elliot agreed. "But that doesn't change the fact that I don't see a future for us anymore. Not after this." They sat in silence for several minutes. Only the ticking of the clock on the wall and Veronica's occasional sobs broke the silence. "What now?" she finally asked. "I'll contact a lawyer about the divorce," Elliot replied. "We'll have to decide what to do about the house, how to divide the property." "What about today?" Veronica looked lost, as if reality was only now beginning to sink in. Elliot sighed. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight, and tomorrow I'll think about what to do next." He stood up, feeling strangely light. It was as if making this decision had lifted a heavy burden of doubt from his shoulders. Yes, there was a long and painful process ahead. Papers, lawyers, dividing property, explaining things to friends and relatives. But the first step had been taken. And it was a step toward regaining his dignity, toward a new life without lies and betrayal. "I loved you, Veronica," he said, stopping at the foot of the stairs, "with all my heart. But sometimes love isn't enough." She didn't answer, just continued to cry quietly on the sofa. Elliot went upstairs to the guest room, which would now be his refuge for an indefinite period of time. He sank onto the bed and, for the first time in this crazy day, allowed himself to feel the full range of emotions: pain, anger, disappointment, fear of the unknown, and a strange, unexpected relief. Something had ended, but something else was just beginning. A week passed. Elliot lived in the guest room, which was becoming more and more his personal space with each passing day. A few shirts in the closet, books on the bedside table, a laptop on the desk by the window. The minimalism of a forced migrant. He and Veronica established a kind of coexistence. She left for work before him and came home later. They crossed paths in the kitchen or hallway, exchanging only the necessary phrases. "I paid the electric bill. There's lasagna in the fridge if you want. I'll be home late today." Life was on autopilot, without emotion or personal conversation. On Monday, Elliot contacted a divorce lawyer, Lindsay Warren, a reserved, middle-aged woman with a penetrating gaze and a direct, to-the-point manner of speaking. She asked a few questions about the length of the marriage, joint property, and the financial situation of both spouses. "I can start preparing the paperwork," she said at the end of their meeting. "But considering that you don't have children or any serious disputes over property, you might want to consider a peaceful separation without going to court. It would be quicker and cheaper for everyone." Elliot agreed. Despite the pain and betrayal, he didn't want to get back at Veronica. He just wanted to move on. On Thursday, when he got home from work, Elliot noticed that Veronica's car wasn't in the driveway. She wasn't home for most of the evening, which was unusual even for their current schedule of avoiding each other. He ate dinner alone, watched a documentary about deep-sea creatures, and went to bed without waiting for her to return. On Friday morning, Elliot woke up to the sound of the front door slamming. The clock read 6 a.m. He listened to the footsteps downstairs, too heavy for Veronica, and quickly got dressed. When he went down to the kitchen, he saw an unfamiliar man in overalls setting a box on the table. "Good morning," said the man when he saw Elliot. "Mr. Forsyth? A delivery for your wife. She asked me to bring it inside and gave me the door code." What code? Elliot frowned. For this new electronic system, the man pointed to the door. Didn't you install it? Mrs. Forsythe said her husband insisted on having the locks replaced. Elliot looked at the door in confusion. Sure enough, instead of the familiar lock, there was a new system with a digital panel, and he knew nothing about it. Oh yes, he muttered, not wanting to get into an explanation with a stranger. Thanks for the delivery. When the courier left, Elliot examined the box. Inside were several folders with documents, letters, and some of Veronica's personal belongings, photographs, a small ceramic figurine she always kept on her desk, and a notebook with contacts. It looked as if she had taken all her things from work. Elliot felt a sense of unease growing inside him. What had happened? Why had Veronica taken her things from work? And why had she changed the locks without telling him? Was she trying to kick him out of the house? He took out his phone and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. Elliot sent a short message. Saw the delivery. What's going on? Where are you? There was no reply. Elliot spent the entire morning in a state of nervous anticipation. He missed an important meeting at work, citing personal circumstances, and by midday he was becoming seriously concerned. Despite their current situation, Veronica always responded to his messages, especially when they concerned practical matters. At 2 o'clock, just as he was about to call the hospitals, the front door opened and Veronica walked in. She looked exhausted. Her face was pale. She had dark circles under her eyes and her gaze was dull. She was holding a small travel bag in her hand. "Where have you been?" Elliot asked, getting up from the sofa. "At a motel," she replied wearily. "I needed time to think." "You could have at least warned me," he frowned. "And what are these new locks? Why did you do this behind my back?" Veronica sank into a chair as if she didn't have the strength to stand. "It wasn't me. It was Bradley," she said so quietly that Elliot could barely hear her. "Bradley? What does he have to do with this?" "He fired me." Veronica looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "On Wednesday. He said I no longer fit in with the company spirit." Elliot slowly sat down across from her. "He fired you because of what happened?" "Not exactly," she smiled bitterly. "Officially, it was for unprofessional conduct in the workplace. But really, it was revenge, for not going with him that night." She paused, gathering her thoughts. After your altercation, he left in a rage, and the next day he called me into his office. He said that everything that had happened was a test and that I had failed, that he was disappointed in me." Veronica shook her head. "But I could fix everything if I moved in with him right now. He offered me a job as marketing director, promised me a car, help with the rent." "And you refused," Elliot concluded. "Of course I refused," Veronica exclaimed. By that point, I had begun to understand what a manipulator he had been all along, how he had used my ambition, my insecurity. She rubbed her face with her hands. "Anyway, I told him I didn't want anything to do with him outside of work, and then he changed. He became cold and formal, and on Wednesday he called me into HR and fired me." Elliot pondered her words. Part of him felt a malicious satisfaction that Bradley had been rejected, but another part was concerned about the practical consequences. "What about the locks?" he reminded her. "You didn't answer that." "That was Bradley, too," Veronica said wearily. "I got a strange call from the security company yesterday. They thanked me for ordering a new system and said the installer would be coming in the morning. I didn't order anything. It turns out the order was placed in my name, at my address, but paid for with the Markham Properties corporate card. I tried to cancel, but they said the workers had already left and would be there in an hour. I didn't have time to warn you," she said, lowering her eyes. "Besides, I thought you wouldn't be home in the morning. You think Bradley is trying to, what, intimidate you?" Elliot frowned. "I don't know," Veronica shrugged. "Maybe it's his way of letting me know that he can interfere in our life." That he has our address, access. I don't know. I spent the night in a motel because she hesitated. Because I was afraid to go back to the house alone. Elliot felt anger rising inside him. Despite everything that had happened between him and Veronica, the thought that someone was deliberately trying to intimidate her filled him with deep indignation. "We need to report this to the police," he said. "This is stalking. We don't have any proof." Veronica shook her head. "The order was placed in my name, using my information. Technically, the company just gave me a gift. That's what Bradley said when I called him to find out what was going on." "You called him?" "Yes, yesterday. He was strangely calm. He said it was a farewell gift for my dedicated work, and that he hoped it would make my home safer." She shuddered. There was something in his voice. "I couldn't stay at home after that." They sat in silence for a while. Elliot tried to process all this information. He hadn't expected their breakup to be easy, but he also hadn't thought that a third person would be involved, especially someone as vindictive as Bradley Markham. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked. Veronica took a deep breath. "I came to talk to you," she said quietly, "to ask you to reconsider our decision to divorce." Elliot froze, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "What?" "Elliot, I made a huge mistake." Veronica leaned forward, her eyes shining feverishly. "I let this manipulator get into my head, make me doubt what we had. But now I see everything clearly. I don't want to lose you, lose our life." "Veronica, let me finish, please." She raised her hand. "I know I betrayed your trust. I know I hurt you in a way that I may never be able to fully repair. But I'm asking you to give us another chance. We can go to a counselor, work on rebuilding our relationship. I'll do whatever it takes." Elliot looked at the woman in front of him, tortured, sincere, desperately clinging to what had already been destroyed. Part of his heart responded to her plea. All those years together, all the memories, the plans they had made. "I'm afraid," he said quietly, "that some things can't be fixed, Veronica. But we haven't even tried." Her voice was filled with despair. "Aren't 12 years together worth at least one try?" Elliot stood up and walked over to the window. He looked out at their small, well-kept yard, at the maple tree in the middle of the lawn, at the swing set they had put up last summer. All the little details of their life together that now seemed so fragile and unreliable. "It's not just the affair," he said without turning around. "It's what you thought of me, that you were willing to subject me to such humiliation." "I didn't know what I was doing," Veronica whispered. Bradley, he manipulated me, changed my perception little by little." "Okay," Elliot turned to her. "Let's say that's true. But tell me honestly, why did you give in to his manipulation? What inside you responded to it?" Veronica lowered her eyes. I felt like my life had become too predictable," she admitted quietly. Work, home, work, home. Every day was the same as the one before, and Bradley offered something new and exciting. He said I was special, that I deserved more. "Didn't I tell you that?" Elliot asked bitterly. "Of course you did," she looked up at him. "But it was different. I'd been hearing those words from you for years. They became familiar. But coming from him, they sounded fresh, exciting. I know it sounds awful," Veronica shook her head. "I'm not proud of it. But you asked for honesty." Elliot nodded. He appreciated her sincerity, even if the truth hurt. "So what now?" he asked. "Bradley's out of your life and you're coming back to me until the next exciting person comes along?" "No!" Veronica exclaimed. "I realize that true value isn't in novelty but in depth, in reliability, in boredom," Elliot finished for her. "In the predictability that weighed so heavily on you." "I was a fool," Veronica said quietly. "I didn't understand that stability isn't boredom but a foundation." That true happiness isn't in the constant pursuit of new experiences, but in building something lasting. Elliot sighed. He heard the sincerity in her words and saw the remorse in her eyes. Part of him wanted to believe that they could really start over, rebuild what had been destroyed. But another part, "I don't trust you anymore, Veronica," he finally said, and the words came out with difficulty. "I'm trying, but I can't. Every time I look at you, I see that night. I see you standing in front of me, saying that your lover is waiting in the car to join us." She flinched at his words as if she had been physically struck. "I know," she whispered, "and I would give anything to go back and change it." "But we can't go back," Elliot replied. "We can only move forward, and I don't see how we can move forward together." "But you still love me," she said, not as a question but as a statement. "I can see it in your eyes." Elliot paused, considering her words. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I'll probably always love the Veronica you were to me all these years, but I'm not sure I can ever love the woman you've become recently, or the woman you might become in the future." A heavy silence hung in the room. Veronica didn't cry. It seemed she had no tears left. She just sat there, her shoulders slumped, a look of deep exhaustion on her face. "I really lost you, didn't I?" she finally said. "We lost each other," Elliot corrected gently. "Maybe it started long before Bradley. Maybe we just didn't notice how far apart we were growing." Veronica nodded slowly. "What are we going to do about the house?" she asked in a practical tone that showed she was beginning to accept reality. "I think we should sell it," Elliot replied. "Split the money evenly and start over. Separately." "Are you going to stay in Norwood?" Elliot thought about it. The question had been tormenting him for the last few days. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "I have my job here, my friends, but also a lot of memories. What about you?" "I think it's better if I leave," Veronica smiled weakly. "Too much. Everything." "Bradley?" Elliot asked understandingly. "That too," she nodded. "I don't feel safe around him. His gift with the locks. It was creepy." "I'll talk to him," Elliot decided suddenly. "No!" Veronica threw her head up. "Don't. It'll only make things worse. I'll just disappear from his life, from Norwood. Start over somewhere else." Elliot nodded, though inside he was still seething with anger at this man who had so easily destroyed their lives and was now trying to intimidate Veronica. "Do you know where you're going?" he asked. "I have a cousin in Seattle," Veronica replied. "She's been asking me to visit for a long time. Maybe I'll start there." They fell silent again. So much had been said, and yet so much remained unsaid. Years of living together, plans, hopes, disappointments. It was impossible to fit it all into one conversation. "I'm sorry," Veronica finally said. "I really am. I want you to know that what we had was real, at least for me." "For me too," Elliot replied quietly. "And I hope that one day we'll be able to look back on this without pain." She nodded and stood up, picking up her travel bag. "I'll pack the rest of my things over the weekend," she said. "In the meantime, I think I'll stay with a friend." "You can stay here," Elliot offered. "This is still your home too." "Thank you, but I think we both need some space," Veronica smiled weakly. "Thanks for talking, for being honest." Elliot nodded. He wanted to say something else, something meaningful that could somehow sum up their 12 years together, but the words wouldn't come. Perhaps there were no right words for such a moment. Veronica paused for another second, then turned and walked toward the door. Elliot watched her leave, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The decision had been made. The path forward was clear. And although the future was frightening in its uncertainty, he knew he was doing the right thing. When the door closed behind her, Elliot walked over to the window. He watched Veronica walk to her car, get in, and slowly drive away. He watched until her car disappeared around the corner, taking with it a part of his past. Then he turned back to the empty house, which now seemed too big for one person. There was a lot to do ahead of him. Legal formalities, selling the house, finding a new place to live, explaining things to friends and family. But right now, in this moment, Elliot felt only a quiet confidence that he had made the right decision. Sometimes you have to let go of what you love in order to move on, even if it hurts, even if the future is scary, because the alternative, a life without trust, filled with doubt and suspicion, was no life at all. And Elliot Forsyth was ready to start over, with a clean slate, alone. Autumn in Norwood was always especially beautiful. The maple tree on the lawn in front of Elliot's house was turning bright red, its leaves slowly falling to the ground, creating a golden red carpet on the grass. At other times, Elliot would have loved this sight, but now it only made him feel melancholy. A month had passed since that conversation with Veronica. A month of filling out paperwork, meeting with lawyers, appraising property, and giving endless explanations to friends and relatives. Every time Elliot told someone that he and Veronica were breaking up, he saw the same reaction. First disbelief, then shock, then awkward attempts to comfort or give advice. And every time, Elliot avoided giving detailed explanations. We realized we wanted different things out of life, sounded plausible enough, and didn't require going into humiliating details. After that day, Veronica did move in with a friend, then into a rented apartment. She came by a few times to pick up her things, but they tried not to run into each other. Communication was limited to practical matters via text and email. The house was put up for sale. A cozy home in a quiet neighborhood, ideal for a young family, read the listing prepared by the real estate agent. Elliot felt a strange sensation when he first read those words. That was exactly how he and Veronica had imagined the house when they bought it 8 years ago, the beginning of their own family history, a story that was now coming to an end. Today was supposed to be the final meeting with Veronica and both lawyers to sign the last documents. At the last minute, Veronica suggested meeting without the lawyers, so as not to make it even more formal than it already is. Elliot agreed. They arranged to meet at a small cafe on neutral ground. Elliot entered the coffee corner, a place where he and Veronica had never been together, which made it ideal for such a conversation. She was already sitting at a table by the window with a folder of documents and 2 cups of coffee. "I took the liberty of ordering you an Americano," Veronica said instead of a greeting. "Still black, no sugar?" "Yes, thank you," Elliot replied, sitting down across from her. She looked different. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, cut to shoulder length instead of her usual long locks. She was dressed in a simple gray sweater and jeans, no trace of the business style she had adopted while working for Bradley. "How are you?" Elliot asked, the question sounding strange in their current circumstances. "Not bad," Veronica smiled slightly, considering the circumstances. "I found a temporary job in the accounting department of a construction company. Nothing special, but the pay is good." "That's good," Elliot nodded. "And you?" she asked. "How's the factory?" "Same as always," he shrugged, although I was offered a promotion to head of the engineering department. "Really?" Her eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Congratulations, Elliot. You deserve it." "Thanks," he took a sip of coffee. "I haven't decided whether to accept yet." "Why not?" Veronica was surprised. "It's the job you've been talking about for the last 2 years." Elliot paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm thinking about moving," he finally said. "Maybe Boston or Chicago. My college friend works for an engineering firm in Chicago and says they need specialists. Or maybe something completely different. Seattle, Portland." "I see," Veronica said quietly. "A new beginning." "Something like that?" Elliot nodded. "What about you? Still planning to move in with your sister?" "Yes, I already bought a ticket for next week. I'll stay with her for a while and see how it goes." They fell silent, realizing that the pleasantries were coming to an end. It was time to get down to business, the reason they had met. "My lawyer has checked all the documents," Veronica said, opening a folder. "Everything looks correct. Sale of the house, division of property in half, no mutual financial obligations." "Mine approved everything too," replied Elliot. "All that's left is to sign." She took out a pen and pushed one set of documents toward him. For a while they signed the papers in silence, placing their signatures where the boxes were marked. Each signature was a small conclusion to their shared history. "That's it," Veronica said when the last document was signed. "All that's left is to send them to our lawyers and they'll forward everything to the court. In a few weeks, everything will be officially finalized." "Yes," Elliot agreed, putting his copies back in the folder. They fell silent again. According to the rules of social interaction, this was the moment when they should have said goodbye and gone their separate ways, but neither of them was in a hurry to do so. "You know," Veronica finally said, "I'd like to say something before we say goodbye for good." Elliot braced himself for another apology or, perhaps, an accusation. But Veronica surprised him. "I want to thank you," she said, looking him straight in the eye, "for not making this process more painful than it had to be, for not taking revenge on me, even though you had every right to." "I didn't want revenge," Elliot replied quietly. "I just wanted closure. And also," Veronica continued, "I want you to know that I admire how you handled yourself, that night and afterwards. It took strength. Not the kind of brute strength that Bradley extolled with his talk of alpha males." She grimaced slightly as she said the words. Real strength of character. Elliot didn't know how to respond. He didn't consider his actions particularly strong or admirable. He had simply done what he thought was right. "After everything that happened, I thought a lot," Veronica continued when he didn't respond. "About myself, about how easily I let myself be manipulated, how quickly I gave up my values, my principles for flattery and promises." "We all make mistakes," Elliot said. "Yes, but not everyone is willing to admit them and learn from them," Veronica smiled weakly. "I hope I've learned something from this experience. About myself, about my boundaries, about what's really important." Elliot nodded. He, too, had learned a lot over the past few weeks. "Do you know what happened to Bradley?" he asked, surprising himself. Veronica shook her head. "I try not to follow him, but I heard from former colleagues that he's having problems with his business. I think 2 more employees quit after me. Rumor has it that they were also his targets." "Not surprising," Elliot muttered. "Has he bothered you since? After the locks?" he asked cautiously. "No," Veronica replied. "He must have found new victims for his games. Or maybe your warning really had an effect on him." Elliot remembered how Bradley had looked at him that night, with real fear in his eyes. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he had faced the consequences of his actions. "In any case, it's all in the past," Veronica said, closing the folder with the documents. "For both of us." Elliot nodded. She was right. It was time to move on. "Well," Veronica stood up, "I should probably go. I still have to finish packing." Elliot stood up too. "Good luck in Seattle," he said sincerely. "I hope you find what you're looking for." "Thanks," she smiled. "And you too, Elliot, whether you stay in Norwood or move away." They stood facing each other, not knowing how to say goodbye. A handshake seemed too formal, a hug too intimate for their current relationship. Finally, Veronica simply nodded and headed for the door. Elliot watched her go, feeling a strange emptiness inside. It was the end of an important chapter in his life. Not the one he had imagined, but still. He left the cafe a few minutes later. The day was cool and sunny, typical for October in Ohio. Elliot decided to take a walk before driving home. He needed time to collect his thoughts. Reflecting on the past few months, Elliot realized how much he had changed. He had always tried to be a good guy, someone who avoided conflict, who was always willing to compromise, who put other people's wishes above his own. But now he realized that this trait, which he had considered his strength, was often a weakness. It allowed other people to take advantage of him, to cross his boundaries. That night, when he stood up to Bradley, something changed in his self-perception. For the first time in a long time, he felt that he could stand up for himself, not just physically, but emotionally, that he had the right to defend his dignity and stand up for his values. And his subsequent decision to break up with Veronica, despite their long history and his own feelings for her, was a continuation of this new understanding. Sometimes loving yourself means being willing to let go of what hurts you, even if you're still attached to it. Now that the papers were signed, Elliot felt not only sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. It was as if a heavy burden he had been carrying for months had finally been lifted from his shoulders. The future was uncertain, but it also held possibilities to create a life on his own terms. He hadn't decided yet whether he would move to another city or stay in Norwood. He hadn't decided whether to accept the promotion or try something completely new. But for the first time in a long time, these decisions didn't seem scary, but exciting. These were his decisions, which he could make based solely on his own desires and needs. Elliot reached a small park and sat down on a bench. From here, he had a view of the river flowing leisurely through the city. The water sparkled in the sun, reflecting the blue sky and the red and yellow treetops along the shore. Beautiful. He had never really noticed this beauty before, always too busy thinking about the future or the past. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Nate had sent a message. How did it go? Elliot thought for a moment, then replied, "Fine. The papers are signed. I'm free as a bird." Free. The word sounded strange, almost foreign. In his 12 years with Veronica, he had grown accustomed to thinking of himself as part of a couple, as a husband, a partner. Now he had to rediscover himself as an individual. It was scary, but exciting at the same time. "Should we celebrate? Beer at the Old Oak tonight?" Nate texted. Elliot smiled. Normally, he would have declined, citing fatigue or work, but today was not a normal day. "Yes," he replied. "Let's meet at 8. He put his phone away and looked back at the river. He had a whole life ahead of him to rebuild. It wouldn't happen overnight, but step by step. And the first step was simply accepting the present moment, with all its uncertainty, pain, but also beauty. Elliot took a deep breath of the cool autumn air. He didn't know what his future held. He didn't know if he would find love again or remain alone, move to a new city or find his place here in Norwood. He didn't know if his new life would be easier or happier than his previous one. But one thing he knew for sure. He would no longer sacrifice his dignity for someone else. He would not suppress his needs to meet the expectations of others. He would not be so afraid of conflict that he would allow others to cross his boundaries. It was a lesson that had come at too high a price. But now that he had learned it, Elliot had no intention of forgetting it. Because self-respect was not a luxury, but a necessity. And the first step to true happiness was not the fleeting excitement of novelty, but the deep, lasting feeling that comes when you live in harmony with yourself. He got up from the bench and walked toward the house that would soon cease to be his, but which would always be a part of his story. A story that was far from over. Ahead lay autumn, then winter, and after that, the inevitable spring with its promise of new beginnings. And Elliot Forsyth was ready to meet it, not as the man he was, but as the man he was becoming, stronger, wiser, and more true to himself. He didn't yet know where the road would take him, but for the first time in a long time he couldn't wait to find out.